With GCW currently reigning as arguably the biggest independent promotion in the United States, it proves there's still a healthy appetite for hardcore deathmatch wrestling. To your average fan, hardcore wrestling begins and ends with ECW, the Paul Heyman-helmed industry-changing faction that burned out quicker than a flaming table but left a lasting impression on Vince McMahon and Eric Bischoff as the Monday Night Wars threatened to go feral. But just as WWF and WCW noticed what ECW was doing and changed things up, Heyman himself changed ECW from a regional NWA affiliate into the land of broken dreams and kendo sticks after watching in awe what Atsushi Onita was doing in Japan with FMW. Whilst hardcore weapon-filled wrestling had existed since the 1950s and was popular in its own right in the 70s and 80s, Onita turned it into a phenomenon. A genuine stadium-packing attraction fueled by insane stipulations, death-defying spectacles, and the cult of personality that surrounded Onita himself. With Onita as the driving force creatively and physically, FMW would become the third biggest promotion in Japan in the mid-90s, but would spectacularly disintegrate, leaving broken promises, broken bodies, and broken families in its wake. I'm Ross Tweddle from Cultaholic Wrestling, and this is the rise and fall of FMW. Atsushi Onita. Quite simply, Atsushi Onita is FMW and FMW is Atsushi Onita. But before he was the exploding barbed wire king of wrestling, he was Atsushi Onita, the junior heavyweight ace of All Japan Pro Wrestling. A student of the legendary Giant Baba, Onita was the first graduate of the All Japan Dojo in the mid-1970s, joining the dojo as a teenager after dropping out of high school, hoping he could support his family with a career as a pro wrestler. After graduating, Onita enjoyed several years wrestling on All Japan undercards before being sent on excursion with tag team partner Masanobu Fuchi at the end of the decade. After a disastrous stop in the Dominican Republic, which involved a brash Onita not doing business in the proper manner with a local booker and getting the absolute stuffing kicked out of him backstage, the pair would wind up in Amarillo, Texas, under the watchful eye of the legendary Terry Funk, one of Onita's heroes and something of a god in Japanese wrestling. Funk set Onita and Fuchi up with his contacts in Memphis, and the two would dive right into the deep end, embracing the wild southern brawling style whilst tangling with the likes of Jerry Lawler and Bill Dundee, with things going especially wild during a concession stand brawl against Hot Stuff Eddie Gilbert and Ricky Morton in 1981. The two would return to All Japan in 1982, with the rival New Japan in the midst of a junior heavyweight boom thanks to the likes of Tiger Mask, Dynamite Kid, and Tatsumi Fujinami. Onita was chosen to head up All Japan's admittedly inferior junior heavyweight scene. Giant Baba took Onita under his wing as his protege early on, and allegedly considered legally adopting Onita as his son at one point, such was the bond between the two. It seemed inevitable that Onita would one day be pushed as one of the top stars of All Japan, alongside fellow dojo graduates Genichiro Tenryu and Jumbo Tsuruta. However, a series of injuries would curtail Onita's career. He'd blow his knee out and shatter his kneecap after slipping on some water in 1983, and despite coming back a year later, he was no longer the same wrestler and was forced to retire in January of 1985. Baba made sure that Onita was taken care of financially, but after a series of bad investments, Onita was broke, working a series of odd jobs and even spending more time in jail. Quite simply, he needed to be involved in professional wrestling again or die trying. The birth of FMW. After working behind the scenes in women's promotion JWP, Onita would return to the ring after 4 years in the wilderness, taking on Ryuma Go at a Pioneer Senshi show. But the wrestling landscape was changing in Japan. In the mid-1980s, several New Japan stars split off to form the UWF, the Universal Wrestling Federation, a shoot-style wrestling promotion that sought to look as real as possible, existing in a sphere between pro wrestling and MMA before the latter properly existed. In 1989, the always shy and retiring Onita turned up to a UWF show uninvited and offered to fight any of their stars, but was promptly kicked out because he didn't have a ticket, the naughty boy. Onita spanned this into the UWF being afraid of him, and the press lapped it up. Undeterred, Onita then decided to do what any sane pro wrestler would do and challenged renowned karate competitor Masashi Aoyagi to a fight. The match went down at the World Karate Association event in Kurikan Hall in July of 1989, but Onita was disqualified after using wrestling moves rather than, karate. He also proceeded to wail on Aoyagi because you've got to get that heat, brother. To settle things properly, Onita set up a new hybrid wrestling federation of his own, Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling, and the two would clash again in the main event of FMW's first shows in October of 1989, with public interest high after a wild and violent press conference which saw Onita beaten to a bloody pulp. An FMW dojo was set up to help train the undercard, with a focus on Joshi wrestlers, whilst wrestling journalist and future Kaientai leader Wally Yamaguchi helped source talent and had some of his own students like Gedo and Jado help out the fledgling group, although neither would sign. Onita would also reach out to former All Japan roster mate Tarzan Goto to corner him for his first rematch against Aoyagi. The shows were legit sellouts, with Onita finally defeating Aoyagi on night 2 after losing the first match due to Goto throwing in the towel. Seeing that the events were an overwhelming financial and commercial success, Onita met with co-founders Kazuyoshi Osako and Miki Ibaragi, and the decision was made to keep FMW going, with the hopes of lasting at least another year. Initially designed to be a hybrid wrestling martial arts promotion, FMW soon started to change focus, a decision that made them a ton of money but would set a dangerous precedent in the process. FMW explodes. Needing to up the ante and further differentiate FMW from the rest of the Japanese wrestling scene, Onita and Goto took karate practitioners Mitsuhiro Matsunaga and Jerry Blaman, aka WCW's Jerry Flynn, in a barbed wire death match in late 1989, reportedly the first match of its kind in Japan. Onita got the idea from his excursion, and during the course of the match would be kicked into the barbed wire, with his bicep bleeding profusely as a result. The audience ate it up. FMW were off to the races. Soon the martial arts aspects of the company were significantly toned down as the bloodshed increased. Unable to get a major TV deal due to the content of its shows, FMW garnered word-of-mouth notoriety, building up a rabid cult-like audience in the process. With business growing, Onita sought to expand his roster, bringing in the likes of Ricky Fuji and his main rival Mr. Pogo, among others. Looking to up the ante and keep the audience entertained, Onita would pioneer a ton of matches, many of which were absolutely bonkers. First, he electrified the barbed wire ropes, and then he booked the first ever match at sea. In fact, he booked a whole bloody card, and so on and so on. Nothing was out of bounds for Onita and FMW, for better and for worse. With FMW's first anniversary show on the horizon in 1990, Onita flew to Puerto Rico to promote the event and shot an angle that insinuated he'd been stabbed by wrestlers on behalf of Invader One, the man who was widely believed to have stabbed Bruiser Brody to death in 1988. The angle was in very bad taste and disgusted many fans. Onita initially wanted to defeat Invader One at the first anniversary show to get revenge for Brody, but the match was cancelled. Invader was allegedly refused entry into Japan, and FMW were thrown out of Sumo Hall because they were bloodthirsty, violent lunatics who would have probably trashed the gaff. It's a good thing Invader didn't make the show anyway, as rumours suggest it was all a ruse for the Yakuza to get their hands on Invader One and murder him. Despite the Invader One saga being a misstep, FMW continued to rise. More wrestlers would come into the company. The Gladiator Mike Awesome, trainees Masashi Honda, aka Mr. Ganosuke, and Eiji Ezaki being some of the more notable names. Oh, and Horace Boulder too! Brother. The gate continued to grow, and FMW's popularity literally exploded with Onita's craziest stipulation to date: the exploding double hell death match. A match where the ring would be surrounded with beds of barbed wire and landmines. Of course, Onita and Mr. Pogo were involved, and of course it was bloody ridiculous and bloody ridiculous. But such attention would lead to copycats and competition. This means war. Frustrated with Onita's growing ego and increasing difficulty to work with, FMW co-founders Kazuyoshi Osako and Miki Ibaragi would leave in 1991 to found Wing, taking Mr. Pogo and his manager, Victor Quiñones, with them. There was clearly a groundswell of support for this garbage wrestling, and those who did not want to deal with Onita were starting to have more places to work. Indeed, many were becoming disgruntled with Onita's practices, and whilst he was swanning about in expensive cars and fancy clothes and making obscene amounts of dosh, many of the in-ring talent were being paid a pittance and were forced to change into their ring gear on the bus. Such was the constant lack of proper changing facilities at FMW shows. FMW was still the de facto number one in the growing deathmatch world, and heading into the mid-1990s, it seemed their popularity could only expand. Onita was now 100% in charge of FMW behind the scenes, although he did promote announcer Soichi Arai to vice president, a move that would eventually end in tragedy. Heading through 1991, FMW held its first stadium shows, with a combined 81,000 people attending 2 shows in August and September of 1991. Frankly, incredible numbers for a small experimental garbage promotion. Okay, so the main draw of the first show was huge musical acts, but FMW was a pull in itself. No matter your thoughts on Onita or his style of wrestling, it was undeniable that he had become a massive draw. With the wrestling world starting to take FMW seriously, Onita reached out to some legendary names to come and take part in the madness and lend some much needed legitimacy. With the Sheik making his way to FMW, bringing his homicidal, suicidal, genocidal, death-defying nephew, the innovative Sabu. Sheik and Sabu would eventually take on Onita and Tarzan Goto in what would be the most dangerous match in FMW history, the Fire Death Match. Quite simply, you take your regular barbed wire rope match and set it on fire. However, the fire is unpredictable, as is wind, and what was meant to be an exciting spectacle turned into a near-deadly inferno as wild flames engulfed the entire ring and gusts spread the blaze. Sabu, Goto, Onita, and the ref would all quickly bail to the outside, but the aging Sheik wasn't so lucky, receiving third-degree burns and later slipping into a coma that would nearly cost him his life. The ring itself burned to a crisp, and FMW never promoted another fire death match. The Sheik would recover though, and would even win FMW's main championship just 1 month later. Go figure. FMW continued regardless and blew everything up in sight. The martial arts aspect was erased entirely, and the company dropped the Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling name, with FMW becoming an orphaned acronym like WWE and KFC. The craziness of FMW's product was starting to take a toll on Onita though. First, the silly sod jumped off a bridge into a river in celebration after a bloody hard-fought victory, but all his cuts got infected by the manky river water, and Onita reportedly came close to death. Then in February of 1993, a month after making his in-ring return from the river incident, Onita would accidentally swallow barbed wire during a match and would require emergency surgery to make sure he didn't choke to death. Once again, Onita recovered and returned quickly because he had one hell of a match to promote on May the 5th, 1993. The Onita Retirement Tour. For FMW's 4th anniversary show, 41,000 spectators would pile into Kawasaki Stadium to see Onita take on his idol Terry Funk in a no-rope exploding barbed wire time bomb death match, where the entire ring would explode at the 15-minute mark. A grueling bloody brawl between two people's champions, the match would see a burned Onita get the win and leave Funk to his fate. But as the timer ticked down, Onita would attempt to resuscitate his hero to no avail, and would end up covering Funk to shield him from the blast when the timer hit 0. Think Kenny Omega versus Jon Moxley, but if it went without a hitch and was a million times better. At this time, Onita was quite simply a megastar. He was on magazine covers, was a regular presence on talk shows, he had his own FMW video game for the Super Nintendo, and was becoming, frankly, a bit of an egotistical prick. With FMW having a license to print money, Onita started living super lavishly, was stiffing fellow professionals on the payout front, and to be blunt, was shagging everything that moved. On the business front, FMW would bring Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga back from Wing, and would also lure Wing Kanemura over to the promotion as FMW's biggest deathmatch rival slowly started to crumble. But Onita was becoming even more difficult and careless, treating many members of the undercard like crap, while the presence of the Yakuza was creeping further and further into FMW. Sections of the crowd would be reserved for the Yakuza members, and wrestlers were told to leave them well alone to enjoy the show. Sabu, of course, ignored this and dove into the front row during a match, causing a minor disturbance. Later on, Yakuza members would beat Sabu half to death before Mike Awesome saved the day, with the two having to barricade themselves in a locker room until the heat died down. A year on from his magnum opus against Funk, Onita would face off against his former All Japan Dojo mate Genichiro Tenryu at the FMW 5th anniversary show, with the stipulation that if Onita lost, then he would retire. Lo and behold, in front of 52,000 fans in the Kawasaki Stadium, Tenryu defeated Onita in a no-rope exploding barbed wire death match. True to his word, Onita revealed that he would retire in 1 year after a highly publicized retirement tour, with his final match set for the 6th anniversary show on May the 5th, 1995. Remember, Onita is a massive carny. In the meantime, Deathmatch Federation IWA Japan would form from Wing's ashes, later hosting the legendary King of the Deathmatch tournament, and would try to lure away one of FMW's biggest prospects to no avail. The Phoenix rises. Throughout 94 and 95, it was business as usual, with Onita, Goto, and Mr. Ganosuke brawling with Mike Awesome and the reunited Wing lads in the main event scene, including a big death match on a floating ring in a pool. Of course. The wider wrestling world would start to learn of Onita's carny ways when Terry Funk angrily shot on his protege through the media, claiming that Onita owed him $1 million from their 1993 match. Tenryu and his war group were also allegedly owed a ton of money. As man of the people, Onita slept soundly on a bed made of solid gold. Figuratively, although you never know, the man is a bit of a weirdo. Funk would end up signing with IWA Japan, and with stars such as Cactus Jack, Terry Gordy, and Leatherface also joining, IWA Japan was starting to position itself as a genuine competitor to FMW. Inside FMW, turmoil was starting to spread as Onita was choosing his successor as ace of the company. First, he suggested Mitsuhiro Matsunaga, but he was seen as a Wing guy first and foremost, rather than a true FMW original. Then Tarzan Goto was going to become ace, but he was reportedly unpopular with many of the roster. His drawing power wasn't exceptional, and after Onita messed with his affairs on one too many times, he'd leave for IWA Japan. Mr. Ganosuke would also leave town, and when Mr. Pogo was asked to headline the 6th anniversary show against Onita, he turned the offer down. Insulted that he wasn't asked in the first place, yet also concerned they'd gone to the Onita Pogo well too many times. There was a real fear the show could be cancelled as Onita couldn't find a suitable opponent with mere weeks until the event. However, Onita decided to press on and announced he would take on Takashi Ishikawa, a very underwhelming choice. At the pre-show press conference, a new challenger emerged to take on Onita. None other than Eiji Ezaki, the top prospect that IWA Japan had previously tried to poach. But Ezaki was different from the young boy of years prior, and after a successful excursion to Mexico, he was reborn as the Phoenix Hayabusa. Arguably, Hayabusa was the greatest in-ring talent in FMW history. A combination of the high-flying prowess of Jushin Liger and Ultimo Dragon, with the death-defying recklessness of Sabu, and the never-say-die attitude of Onita. He was more than a mere garbage wrestler, and it was a no-brainer that he was to be the new ace of the promotion. At the 6th anniversary show on May the 5th, 1995, a record 58,250 fans packed the Kawasaki Stadium to witness Onita's farewell. An exploding cage barbed wire death match against Hayabusa. Although Onita won, of course, Hayabusa took a hellacious beating and looked amazing in defeat after showing tons of fighting spirit. Onita would ride into the sunset, and Hayabusa would lead the next chapter of FMW. FMW 2.0. With Onita gone from FMW entirely, Vice President Shoichi Arai formally took charge and rebuilt the company from the ground up. Literally. See, what Onita had failed to tell anyone was that despite the multi-million-dollar gates, FMW was a financial disaster. The 6th anniversary show brought in over $2.5 million. But after the talent and the building were paid for, there was bugger all left, as pretty much the rest of the money went to Onita, including his $300,000 performance fee. Onita had borrowed tons of money knowing he wouldn't have to pay it back. And when Arai dissolved FMW Inc., he borrowed $100,000 from Onita to start up Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling Inc., and even had to pay Onita $50,000 for the title belts, 2 buses, and other odds and ends. Don't worry though, because Hayabusa would lead the company onwards and keep building momentum. Except he didn't. Much of the appeal of FMW was Onita himself, and despite Hayabusa being 10 times the wrestler Onita was, he just couldn't connect with the fans in the same way. It also didn't help that Onita beat him at what was supposed to be Hayabusa's coming out party. Attendances dropped sharply, and while many would come to see Megumi Kodo wrestle, swathes would leave when her match was over, with some Hayabusa main events at this time having around 250 people watching him perform. It was decided that a tonal change was needed for FMW. Barbed wire matches would be toned down and used more sparingly, while fully blown death matches were mainly reserved for Mr. Pogo and Mitsuhiro Matsunaga. The FMW style became more akin to that of ECW, still hardcore, still blood splattered, but not completely insane at all times, and somewhat safer than being set on literal fire. IWA Japan now saw themselves as the #1 deathmatch promotion and ran the fabled King of the Deathmatch tournament in the Kawasaki Stadium, but they only drew around 29,000 fans, 30,000 less than what FMW did in the same stadium for the 6th anniversary show. The deathmatch bubble hadn't burst, but it was deflating, and IWA would soon be on life support come 1996. Slowly but surely, FMW fans came around to Hayabusa, who showed amazing fighting spirit in matches against Mike Awesome, while Megumi Kodo became the female Onita, pissing buckets of blood, never giving up, and smacking people very hard after getting blown up by C4. Younger stars like Masato Tanaka would also start to rise up the card, and the interpromotional war between the FMW lads and the former Wing crew would further escalate. On May the 5th, 1996, over 33,000 would flock to Kawasaki Stadium to see Mr. Pogo and the returning Terry Funk defeat Masato Tanaka and Hayabusa in a no-ropes exploding barbed wire double hell exploding death match. Elsewhere on the card, Cactus Jack, Taka Michinoku, and even the Rock and Roll Express would wrestle. And Megumi Kodo and the retiring Combat Toyota would have a classic no-ropes exploding barbed wire death match. Despite this new FMW being safer, it was still a very hazardous wrestling style, and Hayabusa would start racking up injuries, with his body becoming a scarred up mess in the process. Jushin Liger would offer him a spot in New Japan, while All Japan and WWF would also reportedly look to steal him away. But Hayabusa was loyal to FMW, perhaps to a fault. FMW would receive another blow as Megumi Kodo announced she too was set to retire at 1997's 8th anniversary show. But there was some good news on the horizon, sort of. The return of Onita. With his acting career failing to get off the ground, Atsushi Onita returned to FMW for one night only for Mr. Pogo's retirement match. A wild 8-man brawl against Terry Funk and his crew in December of 1996. Despite it being Pogo's retirement match, news of which was allegedly a shock to Pogo, Onita stole the spotlight at every opportunity because this was the Atsushi Onita show, dammit, and you better like it. Elsewhere on the FMW card, Masato Tanaka and Mike Awesome would routinely twat each other, whilst the returning Mr. Ganosuke would enter a storied feud against longtime friend Hayabusa. Onita would do the inevitable and return to FMW part-time in early 1997, while future New Japan bookers Gedo and Jado and former All Japan star Kodo Fuyuki would join FMW full-time. Things seem to be back on track, with FMW bringing in 50,000 to a September Kawasaki Stadium show that also featured All Japan stars such as Kenta Kobashi and the WWF's Vader and Ken Shamrock. Outside of FMW, Hayabusa and tag team partner Jinsei Shinzaki would be booked in All Japan's World's Strongest Tag Determination League 97. Whilst a working agreement was reached with ECW, with Carney charts going off the scale when Paul Heyman and Onita met for the first time. Onita would try and swing his dick about the place during his second FMW run, figuratively this time, but as he wasn't boss anymore, it had fallen on deaf ears. Head booker Go Ito would turn Onita heel after he formed a new group called Zen to face off against Hayabusa and Team FMW. A move that greatly angered Onita because his ego was still massive and he wanted to remain as the babyface man of the people. Onita's heel turn would not properly take off as most markets were still cheering him out of the building, but the locker room was still turning against him. Kodo Fuyuki was gaining more influence backstage and wanted to steer FMW even further away from death matches as attendances started to decline once more. Never mind that the deathmatch style was super tough on performers. But Onita made his millions doing death matches and he just needed to cling to his spot, brother. Unsurprisingly, many in the locker room thought Onita was an attention-hungry dickhead who only looked out for himself. Shock, horror. With the Monday Night Wars in America showing that car crash TV wrestling could draw massive numbers without anyone literally being blown up, a more sports entertainment style was slowly implemented as FMW signed a TV deal with DirecTV, with FMW in its original form far too violent for broadcast TV. Onita kept trying to meddle with FMW's booking, forgetting that he was no longer in charge, while also working to promote the first ever exploding ring barbed wire death match in America against the Sandman in ECW, a match that would ultimately never happen. Onita was also disgusted at how FMW was becoming tame sports entertainment, and announced he was leaving the promotion for good in November of 1998 to embark on a lucrative freelance run, including several iconic matches in New Japan Pro Wrestling. However, ask anyone but Onita and they'll say he was forced out of FMW, with the locker room and management frankly sick of his conduct. Refusing to put over young talent, wanted to cling onto his spot by any means necessary, trying to meddle in backstage affairs, all the usual pro wrestling bullcrap basically. With Onita gone for good, FMW strayed further down the path of sports entertainment, but it was a financial and critical disaster, with TV production costs putting a further dent in FMW's wallet, whilst many fans turned away from the promotion. The demise. Put simply, the new FMW Entertainment Pro Wrestling wasn't working. Head booker Go Ito would walk away in 1999 due to burnout, with Kodo Fuyuki taking the pen and going fully bollocks with it. I mean Russo levels of bollocks. For example, H, an unmasked Hayabusa, took on Mr. Ganasuke, now known as Hayabusa, in a Ricky Fuji anus exploding death match, where to win, you'd have to stick a firecracker up your opponent's jacksie and light it. These two were heated generational rivals, remember? Fuyuki allegedly wanted to rename the company World Entertainment Wrestling, but President Soichi Arai shot this down, saying there was still some name recognition in FMW. It was just now an FMW that would feature ghosts, curses, and giant biohazard monsters. Yes, really. The gates at this time often struggled to break the 3,000 mark, a massive fall from grace from FMW's peak. A renewed working relationship with ECW would help a little, as would a Shawn Michaels guest ref appearance in 1999, but the rot had truly set in. Like Onita before him, Fuyuki pushed himself heavily and used all manner of publicity stunts to attract attention to FMW. From having adult movie stars join the roster, to matches featuring celebrity chefs and baseball stars, along with many other shenanigans, nothing was too dumb or crass for FMW. FMW's TV partner, DirecTV, would go out of business in 2000, with FMW subsequently finding a new home on Sky Perfect TV. However, like ECW with TNN, Sky Perfect TV just didn't care about FMW and hardly promoted the company, nor did they adequately support them financially. Things were worse than before. Whatever fans were left started losing interest, exacerbated when only proven draw left in the company, Hayabusa, had to take 6 months off for surgery. And yet another similarity to ECW, FMW's money woes were so bad that Soichi Arai couldn't afford to pay many of his wrestlers heading into 2001. Unsurprisingly, many stars would leave town, with the biggest being Masato Tanaka. A last roll of the dice saw over 11,000 attend the 12th anniversary show in the former Kawasaki Stadium parking lot as Hayabusa returned, as did Genichiro Tenryu, while the great Sasuke would compete in the first exploding cage match since 1997. FMW would also strengthen their working relationship with All Japan, but an unthinkable disaster soon struck. Korakuen Hall, October the 22nd, 2001. The main event of the evening saw Hayabusa take on Mammoth Sasaki in a regular singles bout. Mid-match, Hayabusa went for a lion salt but slipped on the middle rope, didn't complete the full backflip rotation and spiked his head on the mat. Hayabusa cracked 2 vertebrae and was rendered paralyzed from the neck down. The match somehow continued until the referee realized something was very wrong as faces ran into the ring, as did Arai, who was on commentary. Hayabusa remained conscious and told the audience to wait for him and not let FMW die, as he was stretchered out of the arena. Throughout his career, Eiji Izaki admitted his high-flying style scared him, and his character change to H was in order to leave the death-defying Hayabusa style behind, in order to rebrand as more of a mat technician. But the fans loved Hayabusa, and Izaki redonned the famous mask and reverted back to that style that made him a legend, all to please the hardcore FMW audience. The wrestling world was stunned by Hayabusa's injury, and many offered their services to help an FMW who had just lost their biggest star. Atsushi Onita also reportedly offered to return but was turned down. But Hayabusa or no Hayabusa, the company was bleeding money, and whatever fan interest was left dwindled even further after Mr. Ganasuke shattered his ankles during a match with Vic Grimes. On February the 14th, 2002, FMW president Soichi Arai would declare the company bankrupt and would close the doors. FMW was over $3 million in debt, with Arai needing to go into hiding, having personally borrowed from over 20 different Yakuza groups to keep FMW afloat. In hiding, Arai would write a book detailing the shoddiness that was the FMW business operation, with Arai putting Atsushi Onita on blast throughout. Onita and Kodo Fuyuki would try and spin FMW's demise and financial woes into an angle, but this too was cut short as Fuyuki revealed he had cancer and would retire after a goodbye match in Pro Wrestling Noah in April of 2002. Fuyuki would pass away in March of 2003. Further tragedy struck in May of 2002 when, unable to pay off FMW's debts to the Yakuza, Soichi Arai took his own life. Arai hoped that his life insurance payout would settle his Yakuza debts and keep his family safe. However, the payout was not enough, and his family would have to pay off the remainder of the debt. Arai's daughter Shell would reveal years later that she holds Atsushi Onita partly responsible for her father's death for having taken advantage of his loyalty and kind personality, lumbering him with the financial insecure FMW without revealing the true extent of its debts and its burdens. The aftermath. Considering the extreme violence of its content, stop-start booking, danger of its in-ring style, financial insecurities, and periods of fan apathy, it's frankly a miracle that FMW managed to last for 12 years. But as we've heard, the story of FMW was hardly a happy one, and this continued after its demise. Hayabusa would eventually regain the use of his legs and was able to walk short distances with a cane, but would never realize his dream of walking unaided in a wrestling ring, as Eiji Izaki would pass away in 2016, aged just 47. 1 year later, Mr. Pogo would pass away due to complications from surgery, aged 66. Many of FMW's big guns would bounce around from promotion to promotion, but few would reach such heights again, whilst others like Mr. Ganasuke would eventually leave the business altogether and return to the real world. Several splinter groups would form after FMW's end, but these were usually short-lived, as old grudges from the FMW days, a diluted market, and wrestling as a whole being on the downturn helping kill them off. Without FMW, Wing, and IWA Japan, Big Japan Pro Wrestling would reign as the king of the Japanese deathmatch scene, whilst CC Dub would carry the torch in the States for several years before GCW went gangbusters. Unsurprisingly, FMW built up one hell of a cult following during its run, and several attempts were made over the years to revive the FMW name. Onita tried in 2002 and again in 2015 before eventually launching FMW Explosion in 2021, allegedly after being disgusted by the botched ending of AEW's Exploding Barbed Wire Deathmatch at Revolution 2021. This was all after a brief run in politics which saw Onita forced to resign after, you guessed it, sex scandals because the old dog still loves shagging. Despite being his own biggest fan, a massive carny, and during his FMW run, nothing special from a technical standpoint, there is probably no better babyface underdog in the history of pro wrestling than Atsushi Onita. No one could elicit as big a response from the crowd, especially after being set on fire and crying buckets in the ring. Onita's influence is still all over pro wrestling today. Just flick on AEW and you'll hear his theme music blaring out in arenas all over America, with Jon Moxley using Wild Thing as a nod to the real king of the deathmatch. Whilst deathmatch wrestling has always been a niche in an already niche world, it is unlikely that we'll ever see another deathmatch federation reach the heights that FMW did. Quite simply, Atsushi Onita caught lightning in a bottle and inadvertently changed the wrestling business forever. Without FMW, there is no ECW. Without ECW, there is likely no Attitude Era. And wrestling as a whole would have been a whole lot more boring.